Hello there. Today, I'd like to take you on a journey into the past, specifically into my past, as I describe to you some childhood memories of a very special gift I received one Christmas. If you've listened to any of my previous ASMR talks, you'll know that I usually illustrate them with images on the accompanying video. However, today there won't be a slideshow to look at because I don't have any photographs of these particular memories. So, for this talk, even more than usual, you don't have to worry about keeping your eyes open. You can just snuggle down, relax, and let my voice guide you. So, let's travel together into the past, to the time when I was 6 years old. Back then, my mother owned a ladies' dress shop, which was on the high street of the little market town where we lived. The dress shop was on the ground floor, and our family lived over the top of it, in a flat on the 2 upper floors of the same building. Because I was very young at the time, I wasn't allowed to stay upstairs in the flat on my own, which meant that sometimes in the afternoons after school, or occasionally on Saturdays, I would have to walk down the wooden staircase that led from our home to the shop and spend a few hours in there with my mother. Whilst I was there, I was supposed to sit quietly, but the hours seemed to drag on forever, and so, of course, I would often wriggle out of my chair by the counter and play some imaginary game on the shop floor. The shop itself was one very large and airy room that had floor-to-ceiling plate glass windows at the front overlooking the high street, and a counter to the left-hand side of the entrance door. Clothes rails were fitted around the walls, while in the centre of the room there were also several freestanding tower rails. I'm sure you must have come across these tower rails. They're the circular clothes rails that can be spun around for ease of browsing. I was particularly fond of them because they could be whirled around like a roundabout. Although, of course, I wasn't supposed to do this. My mother would give me a severe telling off if I started to spin them. So instead, I would sit on the floor beneath one of the towers, where I could hide unseen under the swishy hems of hanging skirts and blouses, and amuse myself by making a collection of the little plastic sizing cubes that had fallen down onto the floor. Do you remember these cubes? You don't see them so often now, but they were about 1 centimetre square and made of hollow plastic, with a hole in the middle so that they could be slipped on over the neck of a coat hanger. Each cube was stamped with a different dress size number, 10, 12, 14, 16, etc., and each size came in a different colour. Quite often, over the course of a day, as customers in the shop picked up hangers from the rails and put them back again, these little cubes would fall off and lie on the floor in a multicoloured mess. So I would meticulously gather them all up, sort them into neat piles of their respective colours, red, blue, green, yellow and orange, etc., then amuse myself by making rainbow pictures and patterns with them on the carpeted floor, while above me, elegant ladies would shop for the latest fashions. If I stayed quiet while I was engaged in this occupation, it would sometimes be a while before my mother noticed that I had escaped from my chair by the counter, especially if she was dealing with a customer or chatting to a friend. And so the space underneath the tower rails became one of my favourite places to steal away to. There was another hidey place under the rails which I loved even more. My mother sold mostly daywear in her shop, pretty blouses and knitted cardigans, formal jackets and skirts in tweed and velvet. But there was one particular rail that was dedicated to a small selection of evening wear. Even though I had no idea, at aged 6, about fashion or the latest styles, I still loved pretty things, and the gorgeous colours and wonderful fabrics of the evening wear section drew me like a moth to a flame. Some of the dresses had metallic thread woven through them, or they were sewn with sparkling sequins or shiny beads that enthralled me. I remember that there was one particular dress, my absolute favourite, that was made from a slippery turquoise fabric, probably a type of knitted jersey, and had long sleeves finished at the wrist with diamante-studded cuffs. This dress was particularly wondrous to my 6-year-old self. I longed for the day when I would be grown up enough to wear a dress with diamante sleeves. As an adult, I've developed a real appreciation of beautiful fabrics and textiles, and looking back now, I think my passion for these things probably began in my mother's dress shop with that rail of evening gowns. I wasn't supposed to touch any of the clothes in case I left sticky fingerprints on anything, and the evening gowns, which were the most expensive items in the shop, were especially out of bounds. If my mother saw me anywhere near them, she would call me back to my chair in an instant. But I adored these beautiful dresses, so I developed a secret way of getting to them without my mother noticing. I would wait until she was busy with a customer. Then I would slide off my chair, duck down underneath one of the tower rails in the middle of the room, and from there sneak across the floor to another rail that was mounted on the side wall of the shop. Over by this wall, I would crawl into the narrow space that lay between the hanging garments and the wall itself, and then I would tunnel like a mole behind the clothes, scrabbling along the side wall, then around the corner to the back wall, where the rail of coveted evening dresses were hanging. Once I'd wriggled my way into the evening wear section, I was hidden by the long hems of the dresses, and so I would simply sit, with my back resting against the wall, and drink in the experience of being surrounded by all those beautiful clothes. I knew I wasn't supposed to touch them, although sometimes I couldn't resist stroking a piece of slippery satin, or holding the hem of a velvet gown between my fingers. But mostly, I just sat on the floor and gazed at sheaths of beautiful fabric dripping down to the floor before me, with their glints of shimmer and shine. It was quite dark, because the long dresses blocked out most of the light from the shop floor, so sometimes I wouldn't even look at the clothes. I would just close my eyes, tilt my head back, and simply breathe them in, inhaling all the unique and marvellous scents of the fabrics that would uplift my heart. Quietly hidden among these textile treasures was a bit like being lost in the middle of a dense, hanging forest of beautiful clothes, and I loved it. If my mother had ever discovered my secret tunnelling manoeuvres, she definitely would have banned me from any further forays under the evening gowns. But I was quiet as a mouse and never got caught, except once by a customer who was browsing through the rails and came to the evening wear section while I was in my secret den. She parted the hangers on the rail, looked down, and saw me gazing up at her. I can only imagine with hindsight what a look of panic I must have had on my face. But this charming lady just laughed, winked at me, and slid the hangers back into place to hide me once again, without mentioning a word to my mother. As a result, I was able to enjoy several expeditions into the magical forest of evening wear. However, one day, as I tunnelled into my usual place, I encountered an unexpected obstacle. In the spot where I usually sat, behind the long gowns, there was a something blocking my way. A large something, an oblong something, about 3 feet high, that seemed to be a sort of heavy rectangular box. It had been tucked into the space between the wall and the evening dresses, as though it had been hidden there on purpose. And for a moment, I couldn't think what it might be. I couldn't see the front of the box, as the dresses were hanging down in the way, but the side of it that I could see was straight and smooth. And through the dim light that filtered in between the evening gowns, it appeared to me to be covered with some sort of paper that had a pattern of what looked like tiny red bricks. A small ledge of grey-painted wood ran along the top of the box, and as I squinted up into the gloom, I realised that above this ledge, the box had another part to it, a sort of sloping lid that reminded me of a roof. Suddenly, I realised that it was a roof, and that I was looking at the side of a doll's house. Carefully, I lifted the dresses aside and peeped at the front of the house. I couldn't see much in the shadowy light, but I could make out the shapes of several tall white-painted windows. And as I ran my finger down the corner edge, I also felt a pair of cold metal hinges, which I guessed must be attached to the front of the house, so it could be opened up and you could look inside. I froze. What was this I had discovered? Could it be my Christmas present? My mother knew that I badly wanted a doll's house, and it was already mid-December. Had I inadvertently discovered my Christmas gift? I couldn't believe it. I didn't dare to hope. And in panic, I quickly scuttled back through my tunnel of dresses, bolted out across the shop floor to the tower rail, and then, checking to make sure my mother was preoccupied, cautiously crept back to my chair by the counter and stayed there. During the next 2 weeks, I didn't dare venture back underneath those evening dresses, even though, once the Christmas holidays started, I was in the shop fairly regularly. However, I couldn't bring myself to revisit my former hidey hole, just in case the doll's house was still there, or, worse still, just in case it wasn't. My mother had told me, in previous years, that if I ever went looking for my Christmas presents, she would know, and I would not get them. So did this mean she already knew that I had discovered the doll's house? Would I have to forsake this most wonderful Christmas present because I had disobeyed her and gone exploring in the shop? By the time I was tucked up in bed on Christmas Eve, I was beside myself with worry, and was convinced that I had ruined everything with my accidental discovery. That night, I lay awake for what seemed like hours. I was usually too excited to go to sleep straight away on Christmas Eve, but this year it was anxiety rather than excitement that was keeping me awake, and I thought I should never get to sleep. But, of course, I did. And before I knew it, it was Christmas morning. I remember waking up and my mother telling me I should go down into the sitting room to see what Santa had brought me. The bedroom I shared with my sister was on the top floor of the building, so I raced down the stairs to the first floor and through the kitchen and the dining room into the sitting room, my heart pounding. It was early, so the winter morning was dark, and the heavy linen curtains were still drawn across the sitting room windows, so there wasn't much light. However, as my eyes adjusted to the dim shadows, I saw something. A tall oblong shape, standing in the middle of the room. Behind me, in the dining room, my mother switched on the electric ceiling light, which shone in through the sitting room door and illuminated before me the elegant facade of a beautiful doll's house. Although I didn't know it back then, my new doll's house was modelled in the style of a Georgian townhouse. It was tall and narrow, with 3 stories. There were 2 sash windows and a wooden front door on the ground floor, and a row of 3 sash windows on each of the 2 upper floors. The miniature red brick paper that I had already seen covered the front of the house, as well as the sides and the back, and the sloping roof was decorated with a different type of paper that was covered with a pattern of tiny grey roof tiles. There were also 2 little grey painted chimney pots that capped the roof, and, taken all together, the whole thing was, to my 6-year-old self, a thing of perfect wonder. My mother hadn't wrapped up the doll's house, but as I sank down on the floor in front of it, I could catch glimpses of colour through the sash windows. Little glints of shiny foil that indicated there might be more treasures to be discovered inside. So I unhooked the catch on the side of the house and swung open the front to peer in. Every room of the house was filled with little packages, each one wrapped in shiny coloured foil that, when opened, revealed tiny pieces of furniture and doll's house accessories. Oh, that was a Christmas morning. Unwrapping all the little parcels and discovering each new piece of joy. The 3 floors of the house all had more or less the same layout. On the ground floor, there was a hallway on the right-hand side with a little staircase leading up to the first floor, and one large room on the left-hand side, which was decorated to look like a kitchen. All of the little wrapped-up parcels in here turned out to be kitchen-related. There was a small, old-fashioned wooden dresser and a series of miniature brass kettles, dishes and appliances to display upon it. There was a small plastic cooker with an oven door that fascinated me because it actually opened and closed. And there was a wooden table and 2 chairs. There was even a parcel that opened to reveal some tiny plates, miniature cutlery, and items of food to set the table with. My favourite food dish was a bright red jelly moulded out of plastic, which I always displayed in pride of place at the centre of the table. On the first floor of the house, a landing and another staircase was situated on the right-hand side, with another large room on the left. This had been decorated as a drawing room, and I remember being utterly enthralled by the wallpaper, which featured a rather grand pattern of rococo cherubs and flower garlands on a royal blue background. The little parcels in this room opened to reveal a tiny chintz sofa and a matching armchair, a coffee table, and, most thrillingly of all, a miniature grand piano, which had a tiny black and white paper keyboard that I was fascinated by. On the top floor of the house, the layout was almost identical to the first floor, the only difference being that the landing on the right-hand side was narrower, because a tiny bathroom had been squeezed in next to the top of the staircase. But the main room on the left-hand side was the same size as the others below it, and this had, of course, been decorated as a bedroom. My Christmas parcels on this floor opened to reveal a wooden bed, a suite of plastic bathroom furniture, a small wooden wardrobe, and, my favourite item of furniture in this room, a miniature wooden dressing table that had a proper swing mirror. That was a Christmas full of bounty. I loved my doll's house and quickly became engrossed by it, arranging and rearranging the furniture to my heart's content without ever becoming bored. Again, I think this early passion went on to influence my grown-up life, because, as an adult, not only did I develop an abiding love of Georgian architecture, but I also ended up spending a number of years working as a features writer for glossy interior design magazines. I'm sure that career path was informed and encouraged by the many childhood hours I spent playing with my doll's house. Even back then, I was more interested in the rooms and the furniture than I was in any potential dolls. I did have dolls and played with them regularly, but they were mainly larger, Barbie-sized dolls that weren't small enough to put inside the house. Strange child that I was quite content with this arrangement. And in lieu of dolls, I assigned personalities and characters to the furniture instead. The grand piano, I remember, was the leader of the house and was a rather pompous gentleman. I would send him off on adventures with the kitchen chairs, who were always very helpful and usually ended up saving the piano, and the bedroom dressing table, who was always the heroine. Sadly, my doll's house is no longer with me. However, my memories of it are so vivid and so delightful that I can still recall the games that I played with it to this day. What I can't remember is whether, after that Christmas, I ever ventured back into my former favourite hidey place in my mother's shop. Perhaps I did. Or perhaps my experience with the doll's house deterred me from ever returning. I honestly can't remember. But the recollections I do retain of those adventures, of tunnelling behind the clothes rails, gazing up in rapture at all the gorgeous evening gowns, and even discovering my doll's house by accident, all add up in my memory to a time of great wonder, great enchantment, and a feeling in my heart of deep gratitude for such warm and cosy memories. I hope you've enjoyed delving into those memories with me. Thank you so much for being my companion on this special ASMR journey into the past. I've loved recalling these reminiscences, and it's been a privilege to be able to share them with you. Hopefully, you'll be able to join me again soon for another ASMR adventure. Until then, goodbye.